welcome to the Animal Training Academy Making Ripples podcast show, the show where we share the stories of the ripple-making extraordinaires with behavior nerd superpowers who make up the Animal Training Academy membership. I'm your host and one of the happiness engineers at Animal Training Academy, Shelley Wood from Drop Your Jaws Dog Training in Cape Girardeau, Missouri in the United States. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. Make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss a single episode. This show is brought to you on behalf of the Animal Training Academy membership. So if you like the conversations in these episodes, then we want to invite you to continue them with like-minded people in the ATA membership, which you can find out more about at www.atamember.com. Within the membership, you can get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalog of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help you problem solve your training challenges. And we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forums area. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behavior geeks. Today, we are excited to welcome Caitlin Cohn to the show. Caitlin grew up around dogs, but actually started out training horses. A desire for a more collaborative, relationship-focused approach motivated her to learn to work at liberty without tack or leads. However, it wasn't until she accidentally signed up for a clicker training class with a new puppy that she found the force-free positive reinforcement methods that she had been looking for. Inspired by the power and possibilities of the human-animal bond that she witnessed while volunteering at a therapeutic riding center and training assistance dogs, Caitlin dove into the science and application of learning and behavior. This passion turned into a profession when she became a dog trainer so she could help others find the joy, harmony, and healing in their relationships with animals. Caitlin developed a special interest in cooperative care after she started training her first cat, Elvis. She now lives in New Mexico, where Elvis is teaching her about consent, autonomy, and how to train smarter, not harder. Welcome, Caitlin.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. I'm really excited to have you here with us today. I always love learning from you and Elvis in the Animal Training Academy community, and it's going to be a real treat for me to get to learn a little bit more about your background, maybe some of that background with horses and dogs that was referenced in your biography. And I know that we're going to dive a little bit deeper into Elvis and some of his challenges, or some of the challenges you two have worked through together in a little bit here. So just excited to talk about all of those things. To start us off, could you share with us just a little bit about your story and how you started working with animals and lead us into what you're doing today?
Yeah. As I said, we always had dogs and I always loved animals. I remember when I was little, I think there was a period of time in which my parents tried to give me dolls and I kind of just put them down until we realized that all I really wanted was stuffed animals. From a very young age, I think I kind of knew that that was what I was going to gravitate towards. But I got into horses when I was kind of probably around 11, and I really loved it. But the kind of traditional pressure release training, there wasn't really room to have kind of what felt like a conversation, to be able to ask a question. And that didn't kind of feel quite right. And so I ended up getting more into kind of natural horsemanship and working, kind of trying to learn to work at liberty, which is basically without, tack or harness or leads and stuff like that. And I really loved it. It was much closer to what I wanted. I think there was a really great feeling of being able to, work with a 1,300-pound animal without touching them. To be able to cue them, on the ground, to side pass away from me and towards me, from 20 feet away and stuff like that, or to ride and to jump a course without a saddle or bridle because it felt like they were really participating. It was kind of a voluntary relationship where they wanted to be part of it and stuff. And I really loved that. But it wasn't really until I accidentally, as you said, signed up for a clicker training class with a new puppy. I hadn't really even heard of that And I didn't even realize that was what I was signing up for. But I showed up and it was like, oh, that's what I was looking for. That's what I wanted. And, it's always hindsight. I wish that I had known then what I know now when I was working with horses and stuff like that, because I think that would have been really fun and I think an even better way. But that kind of started the journey really of kind of realizing that it felt so right. And that's what I really wanted to pursue and figure out how to use and get better at.
And what are some of the things that felt so right about that clicker training class for you with your puppy?
I loved how it all of a sudden the enthusiasm came, of really working with a partner, then my dog. All of a sudden, when I started using those methods, I would get ready for training and, she'd see the clicker come out and she would get so excited, like all of a sudden, would come running over, or start training and really having a partner who participated, who really wanted to participate, who wanted to offer behavior. I think although what I ended up doing with horses felt better than kind of how I started out, it didn't really leave a lot of options for them to really offer behavior or to kind of have a real conversation about what was going on. And I love how those, positive reinforcement force-free methods really hold space for that and encourage that. So you can kind of build together and learn together in a way that feels much more collaborative and equal, I guess.
That makes total sense to me. And when you had first started talking about your early journey and then how you moved into natural horsemanship, you had mentioned then I had written down, you had said things like it allowed you to begin to have a conversation and ask a question. And so I was wondering if, and it sounds like clicker training just expanded on that for you. And I love the way that you're describing how it expanded on it, or at least one piece of how it expanded on it. And it sounds to me like it just built upon that conversation and gave more options for conversation or for communication to the individual that you were to your learning partner. Would that be an accurate way to?
Yeah, that's perhaps a better way of saying it. And I think it also it's a method or a system that gives your learning partner more vocabulary, and so it not just holds space for that conversation, but it also teaches them more ways to have that conversation and how to be more specific about that conversation and communicate what they really want, and what they really need or what's going on in a way that I didn't really feel was possible in previous kind of training situations.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that that's a better way to say it, that it gives them more vocabulary. I love that. Very cool. And who was that puppy?
That was Emma. She was my soul dog. I think we all get one, and I think she was it. She was a great dog, and also I look back and bless her because she was also my learning curve. She kind of saw me from the beginning, when I kind of went about trying to learn about this and get better at it. And she was a great dog, and she was also very patient with me, which I appreciate.
And what kind of a dog was Emma?
She was a golden doodle.
Aw, it's wonderful. Well, thank you to Emma for being such a generous learning partner with you. It sounds like. Did you do training for just your life together, just for fun? Did you all do any kind of competition or anything like that?
No, it was largely just for fun. I a little later ended up training some service dogs and stuff like that. And so I did a lot of that kind of training with her, like public work. And, she was a doodle and had that kind of doodle enthusiasm, so keeping all 4 feet on the floor and kind of calm greetings and stuff. And so that was a nice kind of set of skills to practice, with her. And so she became actually a really nice dog to, take out anywhere and meet people and everything like that. And so I learned a lot from her about how to train those kind of foundations, I think.
Some of the most important and most fun training things, in my opinion. So sounds great to me. How did you get involved with service dog training?
Um, well, I had gone through the puppy class with gotten the clicker training and then had gotten more interested in learning and ended up volunteering at the local humane society's like behavior helpline and ended up learning a lot there and found there was a assistance dog group in my town and I went and I applied to basically intern there because I was very interested in it and really wanted to keep learning. And it seemed like an area where I could really enjoy and get a lot out of it, and I had done some volunteer work at a therapeutic riding center previously. So kind of working in a similar field with horses, and I really, really loved that. And so it seemed kind of a natural next step or next area to explore.
And let me back up just a little bit too and ask about that therapeutic riding center and the volunteer work that you did there. What kind of work did you do? What did the therapeutic riding center do? Who did they serve? And what was your role as a volunteer with them?
It was a really cool place. They actually served a wide variety of clients. Some of them were people with developmental disabilities or other disabilities, physical disabilities, some mental disabilities. One of my favorite programs was we worked with kind of at-risk youth, kind of younger kids who were coming from really tough situations and were kind of starting to get in trouble or having kind of issues like that. And we would bring them in and basically help them learn to bond and interact with the horses. A lot of them really didn't even want to talk to humans, and that was just fine. It was really special to see them kind of start to open up and learn how to build trust and how to be gentle. And I don't know, their horses have a little magic to them, I think, and stuff. So there I kind of, I helped take care of the horses. Sometimes I would be a leader. Sometimes, if you're working with someone with physical disabilities, a lot of times you'll have one person leading and then a person on each side of the rider to help keep them safe. So you kind of just filled in whatever roles were needed. But I really enjoyed that. I got a lot out of it, and it did kind of inspire my future directions in training.
Yeah, it sounds like you're pretty involved or historically have been pretty involved in a lot of volunteer work. You said you volunteered at the shelter for their behavior helpline, and that's really cool that they have a behavior helpline at your shelter. Is that just local trainers, or do they have to be local? How does that behavior helpline work?
It basically, there's a training program. Like you don't have to be a trainer to do it. It's all volunteers. And you go through, it was a fairly intensive program. It was a few months of meeting at least weekly and, educating you on the issues and also how to handle the calls and stuff like that. It was a really nice entry kind of into it because you got to see both deal with, kind of the more acute issues and also help feel what it feels like for people when they start getting resolved and the relief and, that can come from being able to help people through those kind of frustrating situations.
And what kind of issues, I'm not sure how long ago that was too. So it's totally fine if you're like me and your memory doesn't have the answers to all of these questions, which mine might not, depending on how long ago this was for you. But do you remember what types of things that you all worked on people with? Were there very common challenges that a lot of the adopters seem to have?
Yeah. I think there was a lot of kind of, inappropriate elimination. Were they going to the bathroom in the house? Were they barking a lot? A lot of the things, if you're a new dog owner, if you just brought a dog home, sometimes they're having a hard time adjusting to the transition, or kind of a lot of just the basic kind of things that we all deal with. I think when dogs kind of learning, helping dogs learn how to function in a human world.
Yeah, so maybe it sounds like possibly a lot of new adopters, not just obviously new adopters for the dogs they had adopted or the animals they had adopted, but people maybe who hadn't had a pet before, or who were having some challenges that they didn't have with their previous pets.
Yeah, and I really appreciated that program because I think that shelter really focused on helping people keep the pets that they had adopted, kind of reducing the rate of return, of people who adopted and then realized maybe it wasn't going to work out. So it was a really rewarding program to work in because I think we helped actually a lot of a lot of dogs stay in their homes, and really transition and adjust to be part of their new family.
Oh, I love that. I love that the shelter is doing that. And thank you for volunteering there and the ripples that you spread there with your volunteer work, as well as at the Therapeutic Riding Center, and then becoming an assistance dog trainer. All very important work. So thank you for doing all of that and sharing a little bit about all of that with us. And you have developed a relationship with a species that I'm not sure how much experience you previously had with. Are cats kind of relatively new for you?
Completely new. This has been an education.
And when did you bring the amazing Elvis into your life? How long have you two been together now?
He actually just turned 3 a few weeks ago. And he has been quite a teacher for me in a lot of ways. And there is nothing like training cats to keep you humble, I have to say.
So it is completely new to you. 3 years. I guess I didn't realize that Elvis was just 3 years old. He is, for folks who are not in the Animal Training Academy membership and who have not seen Elvis, he is a magnificent creature, just a beautiful cat. And the work that you two do together is inspiring and impressive, and just really, really some beautiful work and some beautiful conversations to build on some language from earlier in the show, but some beautiful conversations between the two of you that we in the membership get to see. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about some challenges that you've experienced as you and Elvis have learned to live together in a little bit later in the show. But before we move to that, I wonder if you could just you've taken us through your journey a little bit. Can you take us through Elvis's journey and the journey that you two have had together? What kind of a cat is he? Where did he come from? What was he like as a kitten? Can you just share a little bit of Elvis's story with us?
Yeah, I would love to. He's a Maine Coon. He is a giant orange ball of chaos. Um, and I think he has made me a much better trainer, I think, in general. I think largely because he loves to train, which is very interesting. He loves to train, but he is either all in or all out. He gives such immediate and precise feedback as to what I'm doing. If my mechanics are on point, if my body language is right, is my timing right, in a way that is very different than a lot of the dogs, I've worked with before. Just the specificity of it, has been very cool. And it's interesting. He's really made me rethink how I define things like consent or kind of autonomy in training. I think there's a lot of things where I thought that maybe I was doing that, and then working with him has showed me maybe I wasn't quite going all the way in those areas. I think I've started to think about consent as informed consent in a way, because I realized there were ways that I was kind of offering a choice, but I hadn't really given full information about what those choices were. I can give an example if that's helpful. I went through a while of teaching dental-based dental care, working on brushing teeth and dental exams and stuff like that. And he is very sensitive to changes in criteria, and sometimes ones that wouldn't register for me. But what I usually do when I'm using any kind of tool is I hold it out, and if he touches it, with his nose, that cues me that he's okay with me using it. And I was working with a finger sleeve as a toothbrush, and we'd been doing that, and that had been going very well. And then I added water to it, just to kind of as an in-between step before toothpaste. And he knows the cue rub, which means I hold my finger out static, and he rubs his teeth against it, which I always do before I hold his face or have him rest his chin in my hand and then actually brush. And he felt the water, immediately backed up. And then it took a week basically to get back to where we were before, because to him, I hadn't told him, and I hadn't communicated that that toothbrush was different than the last time I had used it, you know? And so he's taught me to use layers of consent, is kind of how I think about it now. So if something is different, what I do now is, like, if I have something on a tool, he gets to investigate that first before I then have him interact with it, and then I interact with it, if that makes sense. So he's helped me think much more specifically about what I'm actually asking and what I've changed since the last time we've done it, and how to kind of communicate that. It's like with his carrier, he had some carrier issues that we've worked through, but his routine now is he knows that if I ask him to go in his carrier, he gets to go in, and I'll ask him to leave and re-enter before I close it. So he gets to go in and know what's in there. Has anything changed since last time, before I do something that is outside of his control. And that has made an enormous difference in all of our interactions, I think. It may seem a little fussy, but for him, it's actually been a really helpful way to kind of break things down even more when I'm thinking about my training plans and how to set him up for success and a good experience.
Doesn't seem fussy at all to me. You had me at informed consent. As a social worker, that's a term and a concept that I'm pretty familiar with in the human world, and so it's really cool to think about how that can be applied in the animal training world. And I love the examples that you gave with Elvis. And so I'm wondering, let me see if I have this right, and if not, explain. Please correct me and explain to me how it would be different. But I'm thinking that from what you've said with your toothbrush example, what you might have done differently with the information that you now have would be to take the brush that he was used to and understood brush means this is going to be brushed against your tooth and gums, and it's going to feel a certain way. And now that it's going to feel different because you're going to add water to it, am I correct that what you might have done instead with the information that you now have is to get the brush wet, to lie it on the ground, and to let him interact with it independently to check out what the difference was before you then gave him the opportunity to opt into being brushed with it?
Yeah. I think present it in some way that is separate from how he's used to it cueing behavior, because it becomes an antecedent cue as well, and so kind of presenting it in a way that encourages him to just investigate it instead of cueing a behavior that he knows how to do, so that by the time I use it for that behavior, he really knows what's there, what's going on. Is it the same? Is it different? So he doesn't end up being surprised by a change.
Oh, very cool. So you might even, when you introduced it with water on it, you might even then take it, not just lie it on the ground, but take it completely out of the context of your normal brushing routine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've learned with him that if I'm teaching something new or I'm expanding on a behavior, I teach the new aspects of it, usually in a separate place, in a separate time, and kind of in a different way, and then only add them back into the behavior that I'm really working on once he's really comfortable with them separately. And he's taught me a lot about splitting and really breaking tasks down into their kind of component parts.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I'm loving this discussion, and you have my wheels turning about one of my own animals and a challenge that I've had and how I might work through that using some of these concepts. So thank you for this inspiration and for sharing this. I wonder if you can think of any, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, so no problem at all if not, but can you think of any other specific examples of what you were just talking about, introducing a new component outside of that context? And you're nodding, so I'm going to let you go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I'm currently I'm still working on the dental things right now, and he's very funny. Adding toothpaste has actually taken longer than teaching him to want to have his teeth brushed. And he likes the toothpaste. He loves it. He'll come into my lap and bump my head for it, and I can use it as a treat. But the idea of me putting it on the toothbrush and then putting the toothbrush in his mouth, that's a big thing for him and stuff. And so I work on adding the toothpaste in a completely different time in a different place where I'll just start with having a little bit on my finger, and having him kind of look at it or lick it, and then gradually progressing to me holding my finger steady and cueing him to rub his teeth on it and everything like that. And then I'll add it slowly to a toothbrush. And then, it's starting to be able to add it back into our actual dental sessions. And you start with just this tiny amount, kind of rubbed in almost. I use a fabric brush right now because that seems to kind of be the best thing. And so it's just very, very gradual in kind of fading things into his regular kind of grooming and handling and brushing routines and stuff. I will say one thing that has also taught me a lot about is I think I mentioned in the bio, kind of train smarter, not harder, in that he really maxes out. He likes to work on one thing, maybe 1 to 3 reps a day is his kind of sweet spot. He'll work on as many things during the day that I want. I realized I was thinking about this and I made a little training tracker and realized we probably practice like 10 to 15 skills or behaviors a day. But a lot of those sessions are 15 seconds, and I've always tried to do short sessions, even working with dogs and stuff like that. But I'm realizing there's a lot of value in those kind of micro sessions actually can be super helpful.
Very cool. Well, thank you for sharing all of that so far. And just a couple other quick questions about Elvis and your journey together before we move into a specific training challenge. What made you decide to choose a Maine Coon? And is Elvis like a typical Maine Coon or like you thought you would be getting when you got a Maine Coon?
I had no idea what I was welcoming into my house. I chose a Maine Coon because I move back and forth sometimes between different places. And I know that can be very stressful for a lot of cats. They're to get a lot of security out of their location, in their territory. And Maine Coons are known for being kind of a little more laid back and handling change a little better and there's another dog at one of the places and just handling that kind of thing. And I didn't want to bring a cat into my life who was then going to be stressed by my lifestyle and stuff. And so that's why I chose a Maine Coon. I think in some ways he's very typical. He is incredibly social. And one of the reasons I also chose a Maine Coon is they're supposed to be chill. He is not. He's a handful. I was like, I'm a dog trainer. I got this. No.
Your chill little, did you call him your bundle of chaos earlier?
Yes,
I think.
Yes, my little ball of chaos. And stuff. So he keeps me running, he needs like an hour walk and like multiple training sessions and play sessions and everything like that. He is also probably one of the more spoiled creatures on the planet, but that's okay. But he is very entertaining to say the least.
Sounds like your gorgeous ball of chaos came with a lot of surprises. I'm curious, what are some of your favorite things about living with Elvis?
You never feel lonely. You never do anything alone, whether you want to or not. And he does not let me take myself too seriously. He is a handful, but he's so funny. And he really just loves to interact and he loves to train. He loves to learn. He loves to play. He's a real partner in a lot of, I wouldn't have expected going into this after having had dogs my whole life and worked with dogs, that in a lot of ways, I almost feel like my relationship with him is closer than it has been with dogs. And I think part of that is he really made me earn it. I think dogs and humans have co-evolved together for thousands of years, and there's some kind of innate software, that kind of comes built in when you start to interact. And that just wasn't the case. Oh, sorry. But sorry, he opened another window. We had a little Elvis bomb there. I was trying to say is that, dogs and humans have co-evolved together for like thousands of years and cats haven't. And so I really had to build this relationship from the ground up. And it's really rewarding to have that with him now, and to have as many conversations as we do a day, about so many different things. And I have him want to be part of that.
Thank you for sharing all of that with us. And thank you for everything that you have shared so far. And let's dive a little bit deeper into some of the conversations that you and Elvis have had together and your relationship and some of the work that you've done together. You recently shared as a comment on another post in the Animal Training Academy community, some details about a specific behavior challenge that you had been working on. And I was just so struck by the level of thought and detail and work that you had put into this with Elvis. And I was like, I hate that this is it was wonderful that it was a comment on a post, but sometimes comments on posts can get lost, whereas there are other ways that information is more likely to be seen and heard. And so I mentioned it to Ryan, and he said, why don't we get Caitlin on the Making Ripples show so she can share some more about this, because it's such a great, just a great learning experience, I feel like, for you and Elvis, and certainly for those of us who had the pleasure of reading along as you shared about it. So I'm going to ask you if you could share with us now about a training challenge that you have experienced and how you worked through it and some of the lessons that you learned along the way. And if you could share with others a little bit more about what I was just referencing.
Yeah, I'd love to. I love a thought project, and I live in the Southwest US. And so in the summer, we have very, very frequent thunderstorms. And so kind of if you have an animal, dog, cat, or whatever that has thunder phobia or fear of that, that can become a pretty big deal pretty quickly. And Elvis is pretty sensitive to noises and things like that. And I had noticed last summer that he was starting to get worse, not better, whenever we had the storms. And so I wanted to see if I could figure out a way to help him through that. And sorry. But it's actually kind of an interesting challenge because thunder is very difficult to kind of impossible to really accurately recreate for a training session and stuff. And it also has multiple components. And so I decided to try to work with it in a different way than I had in the past, basically by seeing if I could condition him to have a positive association with a lot of different kinds of noises that I could control, and gradually build up the intensities and stuff with that before he was exposed to kind of the bigger noises in the environment that I didn't have any control over. And also it ended up being very helpful. I think thunder and storms, we think of like the sudden discrete thunder noise, like that crack right after lightning or something like that. And that's true, but there's also a lot of fluctuating background noise. If there's rain, there's wind and everything. And so I actually ended up breaking those down and treating them separately. I think the background noise, I use systematic desensitization, basically finding a lot of audio tracks that I could find online of things like city noise, rain, all that kind of stuff, and just starting playing it very, very low, and pairing it, usually maybe like while he was eating his meals or we were grooming and playing. So it wasn't like it was giving him a treat for it, but it was just kind of happening under the radar while he was doing things that generally he enjoys doing, which was also helpful because, I know what his baseline behavior in those things is. And so it would be easy for me to see if I was going too fast or I was, exposing him to a level that he was uncomfortable with, because those behaviors would change and stuff until I kind of got to able to have a pretty high background volume of any of these things without him really noticing or having any issues with it. And for the kind of sudden thunder noises and stuff like that, what I did is I actually trained a novel verbal marker that I started pairing with, again, noises that I could control. Like I actually used fireworks because it's easy to find audio tracks of that. And it's easy to just play also just like a second or two of them, and started, playing that low enough that he there was no negative reaction to it. And then immediately I use the word yay, because you kind of can't not smile when you say it. Um, so I'd play the sound, give the marker, and then give a treat. And in the beginning, I did this when he was paying attention, so it didn't surprise him, and then kind of gradually built it and gradually built up the volume. And once he was, when I played the sound, would immediately orient to me and showed me that he had that positive conditioned emotional response, at a decently high volume. Then I kind of went back and started doing it when he wasn't paying attention, but at a very low volume. So, that would more closely simulate the real world when these things are happening, when I can't always warn him, thunder's coming right next, or something like that. And kind of worked back up with that, and then used other sounds like car doors slamming or doorbells and things like that, because I think I wanted to be careful. I didn't want to get in a position where he became dependent on kind of one-to-one counter conditioning when thunder happened, because I can't always be there. Sometimes I'm sleeping, sometimes I'm not here. And so my goal in this was to teach enough positive associations with a big enough variety of sounds that it would start to generalize to novel sounds that we hadn't trained with. And it actually worked. It was really fun to see the changes, start to happen. It used to, there'd be a crack of thunder and he would startle and he would scan the environment, and then he would run and hide, and then it started to be where, the sound would happen and I'd give the marker word, and he'd still startle, but then he would reorient to me and come over for a treat, and then, settle or go back into what he was doing. And eventually he would just reorient to me as soon as the sounds happened, instead of even waiting for the marker word, and stuff. And I remember the first time that we had a thunderstorm and he just fell asleep on the kitchen table. And it was just such a good feeling, to know. I think when you live somewhere with so many storms, it becomes a huge quality of life issue for them. If they can spend months basically stressed, or anxious. And it was very, very rewarding to kind of go through this process and see him go through this summer season, this monsoon season, really not afraid, of it. And it was funny. A little while ago, we'd had a break from the storms, and a little while ago, I was working with, we were doing a teeth brushing session. And all of a sudden, this storm came through and had the loudest crack we'd had all season, right in the middle of this session. And I was like, oh dear. And he startled a little bit. But I marked and I gave him a treat, and then I tossed a treat to reset him, and I stood up just to make it clear he could choose, to see if he wanted to continue what we were doing or not. And he just came straight back, laid back down, and asked me to continue brushing his teeth, and that was a really cool experience, because that wouldn't have happened last year. I think so. It's just very, very reinforcing to me to see him kind of thrive in a situation that used to be difficult.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I love how you said it actually worked. And I know that it made me think of the saying, trust the process. I think that so often for me, with the animals who I live with in my own life, who I care so much about, they're a part of my family, and I live with them 24 hours a day. When they are dealing with a quality of life issue, not only is that stressful for them, but it can be stressful for me too. And sometimes in that emotion, I don't know if you or any of the listeners will relate to this or not, but sometimes in that emotion, it becomes difficult to trust the process and to see things objectively like we might see them with a client. And if we're able to put in the thought and then the work and the actions, it does actually work.
Yep, I totally get that, and I 100% go through that as well. And it was a long process, but it was worth it,
Yeah, yeah. And I love how another thing I really loved about the challenge, besides all of the thought and the work that you put into it and the kind of unique ways of dealing with it in some ways that you used, is that it's such a common challenge, thunder phobia, fear of things that become unpredictable, like fireworks on a certain holiday or that sort of thing, is a common challenge that I think a lot of us who live with animals see our animals struggling with. So I think it's something that a lot of people will find value in hearing about how you worked through it. And I really like how you were talking about how you spent time really working on trying to desensitize the background noise. I hear a lot about work on work with animals who have fears of certain noises and about trying to build a positive association or at least a neutral association with the noise itself. But honestly, I don't hear a whole lot, and I'm sure there are folks out there talking about it. I don't live with animals myself who have a lot of noise challenges, and it's not something I've worked a lot with, so I haven't dug into this a whole lot. But I personally have not heard a whole lot of folks focusing on those background noises a whole lot. So I love that you decided to do that. Did you get that idea from somebody else, or how did you come up with that idea?
I was just trying to break down all the components of the experience that he found aversive, basically. And I think also it made sense to me to address the background noise separately, both because it's a separate component and because it's kind of fluctuating but consistent. It's difficult to actually specifically counter condition because you don't really have like intervals to do that with. And so systematic desensitization seemed to be a better, more effective technique. But also because of how storms work, a lot of times, although it is the thunder, that crack of thunder that often is the first thing that is aversive or startles them, a lot of animals will, a lot of times rain or wind predicts thunder. And so that kind of background noise, the association will kind of move backwards in time, and so then they'll start to, when it starts to rain, they'll start to have the reaction because it's predicted thunder in the past. And so they can generalize the fear instead of generalizing, the positive association. And so I wanted to be able to address that as well. So we kind of come at both ends of the problem that way.
That's really interesting. And I could see that potentially being the case with noises. I'm thinking of things like the 4th of July or New Year's Eve, or times where there are lots of fireworks for animals who are scared of those. There are some things that are also going on at those times, typically, that are background noise or background smells, maybe like barbecues. Yeah. So I can see how this could be, this kind of thinking could be helpful with other noise phobias or fears of sudden, loud, or different changes in the environment. So yeah, that's really interesting. And also, how did you decide what made you decide to use a novel verbal marker? Why not just use your regular marker? What made you decide to use something different?
A few things. One is that I wanted something. I mean, like he knows what a click means. He knows my verbal marker for our regular training is yes, and which I think is fairly common, but that can mean a lot of things, and that can lead to a lot of different kinds of reinforcers, and often is really used for kind of operant behaviors, for telling him, what you did just then is going to get you a reinforcer or something like that. And because I wanted to make it very clear the difference between that training and this training, and that this, for this, the marker and reinforcer were not contingent on his behavior at all. It was completely contingent on a change in the environment, on a sound, on something like that. And also, I think, again, you can't always, we wish that you could ask them, right? But it seemed to be very helpful when we started using it for noises that happened in the environment that we hadn't been able to train for. I think I put a really strong reinforcement history on that word after noises equals good thing happening. And so then when something unexpected happened in the environment, and then I used that marker, it was from the outside, it looked like it helped him recategorize what had happened as something that was scary or threatening into, oh, that's in the basket of this cool stuff that makes cool things happen. And so it seemed to have a big effect, particularly in that part of the training of generalizing to a different sound or something that I hadn't been able to truly, train from below threshold all the way up and stuff like that.
That all makes total sense to me and is super interesting to think about. So thank you for sharing all of that. Before I move us on to the next question, is there anything else about that experience that you feel like is important to share, or that you makes you particularly excited? Maybe like Elvis sleeping on the table during the thunderstorm.
Yeah, I think that moment I remember very, very clearly, and I think part of that is Emma, my dog we talked about earlier, she had pretty severe thunder phobia. We had to medicate her. We had to, and even medicated, when summers were rough. And I, like you were saying, like, I mean, it was awful for her, but it also like meant I was stressed. It broke my heart, all summer trying to figure out how to help her. And so there's just such a feeling of both relief for him and relief for me. If I actually started enjoying thunderstorms for the first time in a long time because I associated them with stress because she associated them with stress, so it was one of those I had to kind of recondition myself as well in this. And so Elvis and I both got to take things down a notch and actually enjoy the rain, which is actually really a beautiful thing. I hadn't expected to notice that much of a difference in my own experience of this season, but that was actually kind of a powerful thing too.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad that you're able to enjoy thunderstorms now and that Elvis is able to just snooze right through them so he can save that energy for other more important things. Could you share with us now, obviously that training situation that you just shared about is one that you should be incredibly proud of. But could you share with us now about another training situation that you're proud of and or that you have found reinforcing?
I really got into cooperative care with him because he is incredibly sensitive to being handled and to being touched and to being physically manipulated. I think his autonomy is of absolute importance to him for him to feel confident and engaged and stuff. And so I actually find, we have gotten to the point where he can ask me to trim his nails, or to brush his teeth, or we did training with cones, because he had an injury and realized that the cone was going to be super scary, for him. And just to be able to see him willingly and really enjoy being a part of that process of the things that will help keep him healthy, keep him well. I helped train him to a harness because he loves to go outside. So he, has access to the reinforcers that he wants to have the biggest life that he can, is super reinforcing to me. And it's funny, I had mentioned in the beginning kind of doing liberty work, with horses. And it's actually a very similar feeling, when Elvis, I hold up his nail clippers and he bumps it with his nose and then offers me his paw, and then I clip his nail and we have this conversation. And doing that with an 18-pound cat actually feels very similar to doing liberty with a 1,300-pound horse. Just the idea of this, it's what I had wanted when I was looking for back then, of this voluntary participation in their life and their wellness. And, and goes back to quality of life, I think is huge. I think there's something so reinforcing about being able to provide a good quality of life, for the animals we love.
Thank you for sharing that. I can see where all of those things would be incredibly reinforcing. And I can see, even though there's so much difference between a smaller cat and a larger animal like a horse, where those things would feel similar in some ways. I wouldn't have maybe made that connection myself, but with you having made it, it makes total sense to me. Where do you and Elvis go on his walks, and what does he enjoy doing and exploring on his walks?
To call them walks might be a little bit, I would call them meanders, I suppose. No, we go outside. He loves to wander around my yard. He loves to hunt lizards. we have a squirrel in my backyard that I've named Rufus, and they go out and yell at each other for a good 10 to 15 minutes every day when we can. I think they both, it's a thing. It's part of their routine now. Um, and he loves to explore. My neighbor has a yard that she lets be wild, so it's full of grasses and things. He loves to go outside and be a cat, and it's fun to watch him go out and just be able to be the creature that he is inside, to sniff and to hunt and to wander and to roll in things I wish he wouldn't roll in, and all of the things.
And we've had the pleasure in ATA of watching some of the harness training that you did with Elvis. And it's wonderful that you were able to do that to expand his life in this way so that he can go on these meanders and hunts in a way that he wouldn't be able to without that safety measure in place. And do I remember correctly? I think when we connected before the show and talked a little bit, and yes, I remember because you showed me, you've built a little space for Elvis in the house as well, a catio of sorts. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. I screened in a porch basically and put some shelves in it, and so that he can climb on and be high, in a branch that he can walk across on and things like that. And he adores it. He really loves being outside.
That's great. It's wonderful that you have put so much time and effort into training to help him to be able to participate in those things that make his life better, and also thoughtfulness and time and energy into creating the space that even outside of training, he has the ability to access those reinforcers too. So wonderful. Thank you for sharing all of that with us so far. Is there anything that I haven't asked you yet today about Elvis or about your particular training journey, or anything at all that I haven't asked you about that you would like to take the opportunity to share about before we wrap things up here?
I'm thinking about what he's taught me, that I really enjoyed. I think probably the biggest thing is, I think I mentioned, he takes autonomy very seriously. And stuff. And that has actually been another interesting thing of, has helped me rethink what I do, and that I think there were ways in which I really thought that I was offering that before, and realizing that I hadn't to the degree that I thought I was, and I think one thing I've learned from him is to really emphasize the approach when I'm teaching new things, particularly anything that involves kind of handling or stuff that might be a little sensitive, or feel like pressure and things like that. And that it's amazing how much that has actually kind of changed our training. We had kind of plateaued a little bit with some of our things, and started adding an approach into the beginning of that behavior. So basically I would go sit or stand somewhere else and get out whatever tools, whatever we were going to using, whatever kind of cued what the next step was, and then just let him choose whether or not to come join me. And it was amazing when I started doing that, how fast everything started taking off. I basically had to also teach myself to retrain myself to almost work through protected contact. I was watching a lot of, trying to learn from kind of zoo people, because I realized how sensitive Elvis was to my body language, to me accidentally moving into his space. And this may sound goofy, but it actually made a really big difference. I got one of those retractable shower rods, and I just put it up in a hallway, and I pretended like that was a wall between me and him. And I used it as a visual marker for myself of like, okay, no part of my body can cross this pole. So I've had him on one side and me on the other. And it was just a really it was visual feedback for me, and it was very interesting. When I started, there were a lot of things where I didn't think I was leaning forward, or I didn't think I was reaching that way. And I just did that for a little while. And it really kind of changed my awareness of myself in a training session. And it was just an interesting experience that I don't think I would have done had I not been working with him and with a learner that was that sensitive to those small shifts. But I think it's actually been really, really helpful to bring into other training, to dogs, to, there's a lot of sensitive souls in the world. And Elvis is just willing to be a little more vocal about his.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I love that idea of using a visual marker for oneself as sort of a um, something sort of like protected contact. There is not real protection necessarily there, but it's keeping you on one side of it. Yeah, I think that's really smart. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to this episode again for sure, because that is something that you said right there that I think would be really valuable for me. And some of the other stuff that you were sharing earlier too about your work with Elvis, I think could be really valuable for me in my work with one of my dogs. So I am personally, selfishly, very grateful for everything that you have shared today. And thank you for the ripples that you have spread to me and from the listeners, on behalf of the listeners and on behalf of the Animal Training Academy. Thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy day to share with us here today.
Well, thank you so much. I am incredibly honored that you asked. And I hope this can help some people.
We do, of course, appreciate all of you tuning in as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and are interested in carrying on the conversation about working with the animals in our lives in the most positive, most fun, and most choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.atamember.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behavior geeks. That's it for this episode, though. Thank you so much for listening. You'll hear from us again soon.